Elizabeth Holmes is the former CEO and founder of the tech startup / Silicon Valley blood work company Theranos. And as we speak today in September 2021, she is currently on trial and facing a lot of time in jail, as well as millions of dollars in fines. Now, in this video, we're going to be breaking down exactly what the current state of this trial is, what is currently going on with Elizabeth Holmes, and in this video, I also want to talk about who the real victims of this case actually are. And it's not those multi-billion-dollar investors who were defrauded out of millions. So let's get started. What's up, you guys? My name is Aubrey. This is my channel. And like I said at the intro to this video, today I want to talk about Elizabeth Holmes and her disgraced startup Theranos. But before we dig into that, I have to first acknowledge that today is the first day of fall. At least now it's 2 days into fall, but as I'm recording this, it is the first day of fall. And what better way to celebrate fall than wearing a sweater from my all-time favorite Halloween movie, Hocus Pocus.
We fly!
Now, I'm sure it's a little bit too early to be celebrating Halloween at this point, but I'm going to be soaking in the fall weather at least as much as Texas will offer me. And so to say I'm a bit excited for the cooler weather would be a little bit of an understatement. I have been ready for fall since the day that fall ended in 2020. But with that being said, you guys, let's dig into the content of this video, which is breaking down Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Now, I did a video on Elizabeth Holmes almost exactly a year ago, and in that video, I really broke down Elizabeth Holmes herself, what her company Theranos was, and some of the details about the downfall of the company as a whole. Now, I highly encourage you to check out that video. I think it did a really decent job explaining this entire situation, and so I would encourage you to check that out. But if you don't want to check out that video, or if you just want some more context on Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, let me bring you guys a bit up to speed. Now, Elizabeth Holmes is a 37-year-old disgraced entrepreneur, inventor, businesswoman, whatever you want to call her, but she is the former founder and CEO of the blood work company Theranos, which has since ceased operations altogether. Now, Theranos' claim to fame was the fact that they created a blood work machine that could do really extensive blood work with a fraction of the amount of blood that more traditional machines required. This was a blood work machine called the Edison, and it could scan for things like HIV, for specific types of cancers, heart disease, and more. It truly was considered to be an extremely revolutionary product at the time. Now, at this point in time, most people have heard of Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, and if they haven't actually heard of her specifically, they've probably seen her in passing. Elizabeth Holmes is known oftentimes to be wearing the exact same outfit every single time she is out and about, typically a black shirt with black pants, very Steve Jobs-esque, which is no accident because she was obsessed with Steve Jobs and really wanted to become the next Steve Jobs of our generation, which ultimately didn't happen. In addition to the fact that she wore the same thing all the time, she always had her hair up in a bun, which I can't fault. I always have my hair up in a ponytail, but despite her physical appearance, she is also known for the fact that she has an incredibly deep voice, like way deeper than you would ever expect for somebody that looks like her to have.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Now, I think all of us are in agreement at this point that the extreme deep tone of Elizabeth Holmes' voice was in fact a part of this entire fabrication, that was in fact not her natural voice. In fact, there was a podcast that was released a couple of years ago that showed her being interviewed, and in the interview you can see that for a very split second she talks normally, and then it's almost as if you can hear her catching herself talking in her natural tone, and then she very quickly adjusts her tone and then starts to talk very, very deep once again.
No, it hasn't. Well, if I use traditional words to describe what we're doing, it's hard because people then associate it with conventional processes.
Now, granted, I don't think that there is anything inherently malicious about downplaying the tone of your voice and making your voice intentionally deeper, but I think what it does show is it does show how just incredibly intentional Elizabeth Holmes was with every single thing that she did. She was intentional with how she looked. She was intentional with how she dressed, mimicking kind of Steve Jobs style. She was intentional with how she spoke, intentionally lowering the tone of her voice significantly. It shows just how calculated she was with every single thing she did. And so because because of this obvious intention that surrounds almost every single thing she did in her day-to-day life, I think that there is no denying the fact that there was absolutely intention when it came to growing her business as well, even in the fraudulent ways that she went about doing it. In 2018, Elizabeth Holmes and her former boyfriend were charged with 10 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and these charges came at the result of defrauding investors out of nearly $700 million, including extremely prominent, extremely well-known investors from families like the Walton family, the Murdoch family, as well as a bunch of other very powerful, very rich investors around the entire world. And as we speak today, in September of 2021, Elizabeth Holmes is currently on trial for these charges, and she faces up to 20 years in prison and also faces fines up to $3 million. This includes fines as well as restitution fees. Now, interestingly enough, Elizabeth Holmes was actually supposed to go to court in March of this year, but the court date ended up getting pushed back because of a surprise pregnancy announcement that came from Elizabeth Holmes herself. Now, that was kind of an interesting spin in itself, and I think that there is definitely an argument to be made that pregnancy may or may not have been intentional. I surely know that whenever I make the decision to have kids, I'm certainly not going to do so whenever I am on trial for up to 20 years in prison. But that is neither here nor there, I suppose. And regardless of her pregnancy, she's currently on trial for these charges and faces a significant amount of time in jail. But whether or not she'll actually serve this time in jail is definitely yet to be seen. If you're interested in checking out the Department of Justice charges for Elizabeth Holmes, you can check them out here. I will also include a link down in the description below so that you can read on this case a little bit more further directly from the source, which is the DOJ. But the thing that I think is interesting, and I think it's a true disservice with Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, in this entire story, and this is the main focus that I really want to take in this video, is the fact that these investors, like Rupert Murdoch, like the Walton family, like the other billionaires that invested tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, they are not the people that really took a significant loss with the phony blood tests that Theranos ended up distributing. Now, don't get me wrong, losing $150 million is of course a ton of money, but for a family like the Walton family, that is simply a drop in the bucket. But the real people that really got hurt from these phony blood tests were the people that actually took the blood tests. Now, I would like to give a shout out to a viewer on my previous video on this topic, and this viewer made the comment, "Nobody's accusing her of playing with thousands of people's health and lives. Isn't that her main crime by far?" And to be honest, that comment took me by surprise, because even though I researched Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos extensively a year ago when I made my original video, and even though I've been following the case quite closely as it's gone to trial, I myself never thought of this aspect of the case at all. I only thought about the investor side of things, not the people that actually took the test. And even if you look at the charges of the case, conspiracy to commit wire fraud and wire fraud, these are financial related crimes. They are not criminal related crimes. And the fact of the matter is that there was almost definitely people that were severely hurt by the fact that they took this test that was supposed to give them accurate information, and it ended up being faulty because of the fact that Elizabeth Holmes was such a fraud. Now, I did some research to try to find some different sources of news articles that were talking about this exact aspect of the case. If you look at this case online, you will see a ton of stories about Elizabeth Holmes herself. You'll see a lot of stories about her boyfriend. You'll see a lot of stories about the fact that they defrauded multiple investors for hundreds of millions of dollars, but you will only find a couple of different stories surrounding the victims that actually took these blood tests, one of which is from an article published by USA Today, and the other one is from an article published by the Wall Street Journal. And in these types of articles, you get some counts of people that took these faulty blood tests, and as a result, they had to get some health procedures done to them that could have potentially been prevented or could have potentially been unnecessary as a whole. For example, there is one gentleman out of Arizona named Steve Hammonds who visited a Theranos clinic 5 times in September and October of 2015 to monitor the results of a blood thinning drug. Based on the results of these tests provided by Theranos, a doctor ordered him to discontinue his medication and switch to another drug. It then states that he had multiple surgeries after that, including a blood draining heart surgery that ultimately is questionable about whether or not he even needed that surgery at all because of the fact that he had these phony test results from Theranos. It then goes on to state another case of a woman that was diagnosed with a thyroid condition and ultimately later found out that she never had that thyroid condition, and the only reason why she did receive that diagnosis was because of the fact that she received faulty test results from Theranos. Now, all in all, when it comes to the exact data of who is actually harmed with these phony test results, the exact data is quite honestly unknown. Now, Theranos did come out a couple of years ago, back in 2018, stating that of all of the tests that they administered, only about 1% came back as faulty, and that these faulty tests either needed to be re-reviewed or retested entirely. But my argument to that statement would be, those are just the ones you know of. You don't really know if the test came back as faulty. It could have been a misdiagnosis, and the person may have never been able to find out that it was a misdiagnosis, especially as we see here today in 2021. You don't know how many people's lives were affected by the fact that they took a phony test back in 2015, 2016, 2017. Now, ultimately, when it comes to Elizabeth Holmes, I think that we can all agree that it sure does seem like she is guilty in these crimes that she is being accused of, though of course she does get to have a jury, which is one of her constitutional rights. But me personally, I would definitely bet that she will be charged and she will be sentenced for the crimes that she committed. But the amount of time that she actually serves is definitely a question that is up in the air. The fact is, people that commit financial crimes have notoriously low sentencing, and if she does get a 20-year sentence, I would be extremely surprised. I would be willing to bet that she gets a few years in prison, and I would also be willing to bet that it is probably a fairly upscale facility. The thing that I think is interesting about Elizabeth Holmes is the fact that I don't necessarily think that she was incredibly money hungry. I don't think that she was somebody like Jordan Belfort who just wanted to make millions and millions of dollars. I think that in the case of Elizabeth Holmes, ultimately she wanted prestige, she wanted power, and she wanted notoriety. I think that more than anything, she wanted to be the next Steve Jobs. She wanted to be this revolutionary figure that everybody could recognize. In fact, this is kind of reinstated based off of text messages that she sent in 2014 to her boyfriend. These texts are obtained by CNBC directly, and in these texts it shows that Elizabeth Holmes was texting her boyfriend telling him that she has total confidence in herself to become the best business person of the year. And later on she states in the same text chain that these investors investing hundreds of millions of dollars are not just investing in her company, but are instead investing in their destiny. So of course, having that notoriety, creating a destiny, creating a legacy was something that I think was incredibly important to Elizabeth Holmes, and she ultimately was willing to do whatever she needed to do in order to get that. Now, with it being said, you guys, I wanted to make this video because I've been following Elizabeth Holmes really since the entire Theranos thing blew up, and I thought that it was a very interesting take that this comments were left on my video, because the reality is this perspective is one that hasn't really been talked about. People talk about the financial aspect of the crime and the investors that were defrauded out of hundreds of millions of dollars, but nobody really talks about the actual people that were hurt in this process, and I think that that is incredibly unfortunate. But with that being said, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.